Sir, step away from the counter for a moment. I need to speak with you.
I'm waiting on my coffee. What's the problem?
We got a report about a suspicious individual in the store. You match the description.
Suspicious? I'm in a suit buying a latte.
Just cooperate and show me your ID.
So you're stopping me because I'm standing here? Or because I'm
Sir,
black?
don't make this difficult. Show me your ID now.
You stopped the...
What you just heard started as a routine coffee stop and turned into a career-ending mistake. A police officer publicly detained a man he assumed was suspicious, without realizing he was confronting a black FBI supervisory agent. Within minutes, the situation spiraled from a casual accusation into a serious civil rights violation. What followed exposed the officer's actions, triggered a lawsuit against the city, and ultimately forced the department to face the consequences of a stop. That never should have happened. The man the officer stopped was Marcus Reynolds, 45 years old, a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At the time of the incident, Reynolds had over 18 years of federal service, working in counterintelligence and organized crime investigations across multiple states. Throughout his career, he had led complex investigations involving financial fraud networks and national security threats, coordinating with federal task forces and local departments. Colleagues described him as meticulous, disciplined, and deeply respected within the Bureau. That morning, Reynolds wasn't on duty. He was simply a professional in a suit, standing in line at Starbucks, a man trusted by the federal government to lead investigations, suddenly treated like a suspect in front of a room full of strangers. The officer who initiated the stop was Officer Daniel Carter, 34, a patrol officer with the City Police Department with 7 years on the force. According to internal records later uncovered during the investigation, Carter had already accumulated 5 civilian complaints over the course of his career. 3 of those complaints involved allegations of racial profiling and unnecessary stops, while 2 concerned aggressive conduct during routine encounters. None of the complaints resulted in suspension or termination. Each case was closed with findings such as insufficient evidence or officer acted within department policy. Despite the pattern, Carter remained on active patrol. The department had repeatedly cleared him of wrongdoing, a decision that would soon come under intense scrutiny once the Starbucks incident became public. Marcus Reynolds walked into the Starbucks just after the morning rush had started to thin out. The store was still busy. A few customers were waiting near the pickup counter. Others were seated with laptops open. He was dressed in a dark suit, carrying himself the way professionals do when they are between meetings. Direct, quiet, focused, not drawing attention to anyone. He placed his order, stepped aside, and waited for his drink. At that point, there was no disturbance, no argument, no raised voice, no employee confronting him, no one asking him to leave. He was standing where customers stand every day in cafes across the country. The only thing that made him stand out was that he was a black man in a public space, doing nothing wrong, and still about to be treated like a threat. Officer Daniel Carter entered the store in uniform and moved with purpose toward the counter area. He did not stop to scan the room broadly. He did not question multiple people. He did not ask staff to identify the person they had concerns about in a careful or neutral way. He went straight toward Reynolds. "Sir, step away from the counter for a moment," Carter said. Reynolds turned toward him, visibly confused but composed. "I'm waiting on my coffee." "What's the problem?" Carter closed the distance instead of answering clearly. "We got a report about a suspicious individual in the store." "You matched the description." Reynolds looked at him, then around the cafe, as if to confirm that this was really happening. "Suspicious? I'm in a suit buying a latte." That was the moment. The humiliation became public. Heads turned. A woman near the mobile pickup shelf stopped reaching for her drink. A man at a table glanced up from his laptop. The officer had chosen his target, and everyone in the room could see exactly who was being singled out. Not the white customers standing nearby, not the men in jackets near the door. The black man waiting quietly for coffee. Carter stepped closer, his body angled forward. One hand hovered near his belt. "Just cooperate and show me your ID." Reynolds did not step toward him. He did not make any threatening movement. He did not raise his voice. He stayed where he was and answered, "So you're stopping me because I'm standing here, or because I'm black?" That question did not slow the officer down. It should have. It did not. Carter did not pause to reflect on what he was doing in front of a room full of witnesses. He did not de-escalate. He did not correct course. He treated the question like defiance. "Sir, don't make this difficult," Carter said. "Show me your ID now." That line matters because Reynolds had done nothing difficult. He had not resisted. He had not refused to speak. He had not interfered with the officer. The difficulty existed only because a black customer was being forced to justify his presence in a coffee shop. Carter was escalating a situation he had created himself. Reynolds remained in place. His shoulders were tense now, but he kept his voice controlled. "You stopped the wrong person today." Customers were openly watching by then. A barista behind the machine slowed down and looked toward the counter. Another employee froze for a moment with a cup in hand. The officer's attention remained fixed on Reynolds. Again, not because Reynolds had moved toward anyone, not because he was causing disruption, because the officer had decided that blackness plus presence plus assumption was enough. Carter took another small step forward. The space between them narrowed. The movement was subtle, but it changed the scene immediately. It signaled pressure. It signaled control. It signaled that this was no longer a request. Reynolds shifted his weight back half a step, not to flee, but to hold distance. "Turn around if you're not going to cooperate," Carter said. That order came fast, to fast. There had been no real investigation, no meaningful questioning, no credible basis established in public view. Just accusation, demand, and escalation. A black man standing still in Starbucks was now being pushed toward detention because one officer decided suspicion first and facts later. Reynolds looked directly at him. For what? Carter's response was immediate and sharp. "For obstructing. Don't test me. This is how racism works in real time. The black person is selected first, pressured first, threatened first, and then blamed for the tension created around him." Reynolds had not made the scene. The officer had. Reynolds had not embarrassed himself in public. The officer was doing that to him. Reynolds had not turned a coffee run into a police confrontation. Carter had already done that the moment he treated a waiting customer like a criminal without cause. By now the store had gone noticeably quieter. Ambient sound was still there, the hiss of milk steaming, the beep of the register, the door opening and closing, but attention was concentrated on the confrontation. People were no longer casually observing. They were watching an officer corner a black man who had done nothing wrong. A woman near the condiment station said softly, "He was just standing there." Carter ignored her completely. That matters too, because the officer was not following facts as they emerged around him. He was forcing the situation forward. Witnesses were present. The man's behavior was calm. No one was in danger. Yet the officer kept advancing, kept issuing commands, kept framing Reynolds as the problem. "Hands where I could see them," Carter said. Reynolds lifted his hands slightly away from his sides. "You have got to be kidding me." There was total role reversal. The man being humiliated had to demonstrate compliance. The man being publicly profiled had to prove he was safe. The black customer, already deprived of ordinary dignity, now had to perform harmlessness while the officer manufactured threat. A barista called out a drink order into the silence, then stopped midway when no one moved to collect it. Carter and Reynolds remained locked in place near the counter. The officer's posture stayed rigid. Reynolds' expression had changed from confusion to disbelief to controlled anger. He still had not lunged, shouted, cursed, or threatened anyone. The aggression in the room was coming from one side only. "Last chance," Carter said. "Either you identify yourself or I put you in cuffs." That was the point of no return. A black man entered Starbucks as a customer and, within moments, was being threatened with handcuffs for no visible reason beyond the officer's biased assumption that he did not belong there unquestioned. In full view of employees and strangers, Marcus Reynolds was not treated as a citizen, not treated as a professional, not even treated as an ordinary man buying coffee. He was treated as suspicious first and human second. That is the sequence. That is the fact. And everyone in that Starbucks saw it happen. The confrontation reached its breaking point in front of the entire store. By then, it was obvious to everyone watching that Marcus Reynolds had done nothing wrong. He had not raised his voice. He had not threatened anyone. He had not moved aggressively toward the officer. The only thing he had done was stand in line for coffee. Yet Officer Daniel Carter continued to treat him like a suspect. Carter's voice became louder and sharper. "Last chance," the officer said. "Identify yourself or I'm detaining you." Reynolds stood his ground. "For what?" he asked calmly. "For obstructing an investigation." There was no investigation taking place. Carter had not interviewed employees. He had not asked witnesses what had happened. He had not verified any claim of suspicious activity. What he had done was select a black man standing quietly in a cafe and escalate the encounter step by step. Several customers began speaking up. "He hasn't done anything," a woman near the pickup counter said. Another man added, "Officer, he's literally just been waiting for his drink." Carter ignored them. That detail matters, because witnesses were now openly telling the officer that he had the wrong person. The facts were being stated clearly in the room. Carter chose not to acknowledge them. Reynolds spoke again, keeping his voice measured. "You walked in here and singled me out immediately," he said. "You didn't question anyone else." Carter responded with the same command. "Turn around." Reynolds did not move. "Turn around now," Carter repeated. The tension in the cafe became visible. Several customers pulled out their phones. A barista behind the counter stopped working entirely and watched. A man near the door spoke up. "This looks like profiling," he said. "He's just standing there." Again, Carter ignored it. At this point, the injustice was not subtle. It was happening openly. A black man was being threatened with detention in a public place while witnesses confirmed he had done nothing suspicious. The officer continued forward anyway. Carter stepped closer and reached toward Reynolds' arm. "Turn around," he said again. Reynolds pulled his arm slightly away, not aggressively, but firmly. "Officer, you're making a mistake," he said. Carter raised his voice. "Stop resisting." That phrase immediately reframed the situation. A man who had not touched the officer, had not moved toward him, and had not disrupted the store was now being labeled as resisting. A woman in line spoke loudly. "He's not resisting anything," another customer added. "You're harassing him." Carter did not respond to them. He kept his focus on Reynolds. "Hands behind your back," he ordered. Reynolds looked directly at him. "You're detaining me because I'm standing in Starbucks," he said. Carter did not answer the statement. He moved forward and grabbed Reynolds' wrist. Gasps were audible in the cafe. Someone near the door said, "This is insane." Another voice said, "He didn't do anything." Despite multiple witnesses confirming the same thing, Carter continued the detention. He forced Reynolds, hands behind his back, and secured the cuffs. The officer then delivered the accusation he had been building toward since the moment he walked in. "You're being detained pending investigation." There was still no investigation. The scene had become undeniable. A calm, well-dressed black professional was now handcuffed in front of strangers because a police officer had decided he looked suspicious. Several customers began speaking more openly. "This is racial profiling," one man said. Another added, "You stopped the only black guy in here." Carter responded with the standard justification. He matched the description, but the description had never been clarified publicly. No employee had pointed to Reynolds. No witness had identified him as causing any problem. The explanation existed only as a vague claim repeated by the officer. At that moment, one of the customers filming the scene spoke up again. "I looked this officer up before," the man said quietly to the people around him. "He's been complained about for this." The comment referred to a pattern that would later become central to the case. Officer Carter had previously been the subject of multiple civilian complaints involving unnecessary stops of black residents, according to records later cited in the lawsuit. 3 of the 5 formal complaints against Carter involved allegations of racial profiling and aggressive questioning of black men who had not committed any crime. None of those complaints had resulted in disciplinary action. That pattern mattered because the behavior unfolding in the Starbucks looked exactly like the previous complaints described, selecting a black individual first, assuming criminal behavior without evidence, escalating quickly, and ignoring witnesses who challenged the officer's version of events. In the cafe, the situation had become deeply uncomfortable. Reynolds stood handcuffed near the counter, surrounded by strangers who had just watched him go from customer to suspect in a matter of minutes. One barista spoke quietly, but clearly. He was just waiting for his drink. The officer did not acknowledge the comment. Carter began guiding Reynolds toward the exit. "You can explain everything outside," he said. Reynolds looked around the room once more. "You all saw what happened," he said. Several customers nodded because they had watched a man treated like a criminal without cause. They had heard witnesses object. They had heard the officer ignore them. They had seen a calm black customer placed in handcuffs despite zero evidence of wrongdoing. By the time Carter escorted Reynolds out of the Starbucks, The truth had already been spoken aloud multiple times inside that store. The officer simply chose not to listen. The situation began to change only after the detention moved outside the Starbucks, and the first calls started reaching supervisors. Officer Daniel Carter had already placed Marcus Reynolds in handcuffs and was standing beside the patrol car when another unit arrived. Reynolds remained calm but firm. "You're detaining the wrong person," he said. Carter did not respond to the statement. Instead, he continued speaking into his radio, requesting confirmation on the suspicious person call. Even at that moment, the officer was still treating the situation as if Reynolds had done something wrong. But the witnesses inside the Starbucks were already telling a different story. Several of them had recorded the encounter on their phones. Within minutes, one of the store managers stepped outside and spoke directly to the second officer who had arrived. On scene, "That man didn't cause any problem," the manager said. "He was just waiting for his drink." The second officer looked from the manager to Carter. "Did he threaten anyone?" he asked. "No," the manager answered. "He didn't do anything. The comment should have ended the detention immediately." Instead, Carter continued trying to justify the stop. He matched the description Carter repeated. The description still had not been clarified. While that conversation was unfolding outside, the situation inside the department was beginning to move quickly. Bodycam footage from Carter's unit was already uploading automatically into the department's system. Dispatch logs showed that the original call from the store had been vague and unverified. The call did not report a crime. The call did not identify Reynolds. The call simply mentioned a man standing inside the store. Despite that, Carter had immediately singled out the only black customer in the area and escalated the encounter to detention. That detail would soon become central to the internal review. Back outside, Reynolds spoke again. "I'm asking you again," he said calmly. "What crime do you believe I committed?" Carter gave the same answer. "Obstructing." The second officer frowned slightly. "Obstructing what investigation?" he asked. Carter hesitated before answering. The pause mattered, because by that point the facts were becoming clear to everyone present. There had been no investigation before the detention began. A small group of customers had gathered near the entrance of the Starbucks, watching. One woman said quietly but firmly, "You stopped him the second you walked in." Another customer added, "He was the only black guy in there." The comments were not shouted. They were statements of fact. People had watched the encounter unfold from the beginning, and the pattern was obvious. Reynolds turned slightly toward the officers. "You walked past at least 10 other people," he said. "You came straight to me." Carter did not answer. At that moment, the situation escalated beyond the street level. A supervisor monitoring dispatch traffic noticed the unusual sequence of events. A detention without a clear underlying crime, and multiple witness calls coming in from the same location. The supervisor requested clarification from Carter. "Unit 24, confirm the basis for detention," the voice said over the radio. Carter responded briefly. "Suspicious person call. Subject uncooperative." That description did not match what witnesses were reporting. The supervisor pressed further. "Did the store identify the subject?" There was another pause. "Negative," Carter admitted. The supervisor's tone changed. "Stand by." Inside the department, the review moved quickly. The dispatch call was replayed. The wording was clear. The caller had not described a specific individual. The caller had not reported threatening behavior. The caller had not requested a detention. What had happened inside Starbucks was not the result of evidence. It was the result of an assumption. And that assumption had been directed at a black man who had been doing nothing more than standing in line for coffee. Back outside, Carter remained beside the patrol car. Reynolds was still handcuffed. "You're detaining me without cause," Reynolds said. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, dispatches asking questions. He told Carter quietly. Within moments, the supervisor's voice returned over the radio. "Unit 24, run the subject for identification." Reynolds heard the instruction and spoke calmly. "You might want to do that." Carter entered the basic identification information he had obtained verbally from Reynolds. The response from the system came quickly. The name triggered a federal database flag. The radio crackled again. "Unit 24, confirm the subject name." Carter repeated it. There was a short silence on the line before the supervisor responded again, this time more sharply. "Unit 24, that individual is a supervisory special agent with the FBI." The shift in the scene was immediate. The second officer looked directly at Reynolds. "You're federal," he asked. Reynolds answered without raising his voice. Yes. Inside the department, the seriousness of the mistake became clear almost instantly. Detaining a federal supervisory agent without cause was not just embarrassing. It created legal exposure for the entire city. The supervisor spoke again over the radio. "Unit 24, remove the cuffs." Carter hesitated. "Remove them now," the supervisor repeated. The order was no longer optional. Carter unlocked the cuffs and stepped back slightly. Reynolds rubbed his wrists briefly, but did not react with anger. Instead, he said something simple and direct. "You stopped me because I'm black." The statement was not emotional. It was factual. And by that point, the department was beginning to realize that the evidence, bodycam footage, witness videos, dispatch records, and Carter's own history of complaints involving racial profiling would all point to the same conclusion. The stop had never been justified, and now the liability had already begun. The legal consequences began almost immediately after the incident. Within days, attorneys representing Marcus Reynolds filed a formal civil rights claim against the city and the police department. The complaint was direct. Reynolds had been detained without cause, publicly humiliated, and treated as a criminal while doing nothing more than waiting for a cup of coffee. The filing stated clearly that the officer's actions were not a misunderstanding, but a textbook example of racial profiling. Reynolds spoke briefly outside the federal building when the lawsuit was announced. "I was standing in line for coffee," he said. "That's all I was doing." He paused before continuing. "The only reason this escalated the way it did is because the officer decided that a black man standing quietly in a store must be suspicious." The lawsuit cited multiple pieces of evidence that made the department's position difficult to defend. Body camera footage showed that Officer Daniel Carter approached Reynolds immediately upon entering the store and ignored other customers nearby. Witness videos captured customers telling the officer that Reynolds had done nothing wrong. Dispatch records confirmed that the original call from the Starbucks did not identify Reynolds or describe criminal behavior. In other words, the officer had not responded to evidence. He had acted on assumption. One witness described the scene during the investigation. "He walked past everyone else," the witness said in a recorded statement. "There were people everywhere, but he went straight to the black man." Another customer told investigators something similar. It was obvious what was happening. The officer didn't investigate anything. He just decided that the black guy must be the problem. As the case moved forward, attorneys began examining Officer Carter's professional record. That review revealed a pattern that had never been taken seriously by the department before. Internal documents showed that Carter had accumulated 5 civilian complaints. During his 7 years on the force, 3 of those complaints specifically accused him of stopping black men without cause and treating them aggressively during routine encounters. One complaint described a traffic stop where a black driver was questioned for nearly 20 minutes, without any traffic violation being identified. Another complaint involved Carter detaining a black pedestrian who had simply been walking through a neighborhood at night. In every case, the department had dismissed the allegations. The official findings repeatedly used the same language: insufficient evidence or officer acted within policy. During the legal discovery phase, a department official was asked about those complaints. So the officer had multiple allegations of racial profiling, one attorney said during questioning. They were investigated, the official replied, and he faced no discipline. That is correct. That exchange became one of the central moments in the case, because it revealed a larger failure inside the institution. Carter's behavior inside the Starbucks was not an isolated mistake. It was the continuation of a pattern that the department had chosen to ignore. Civil rights experts reviewing the footage said the same thing repeatedly. The officer selected a black man first, one analyst explained. He escalated immediately, and when witnesses said the man had done nothing wrong, he ignored them. The city understood the danger quickly. The evidence was overwhelming: bodycam footage, multiple witness recordings, dispatch logs, and a documented pattern of complaints. The legal exposure was enormous. Negotiations began quietly between the city's legal department and Reynolds' attorneys. During one meeting, a city representative tried to frame the incident as a misunderstanding. This was an unfortunate encounter, the official said. Reynolds' attorney responded directly. "No," he said. This was racial profiling in public. The settlement discussions moved quickly after that. Within months, the city agreed to pay $2.6 million to resolve the lawsuit before it reached trial. The settlement breakdown later became public. $2 million was allocated for civil rights violations related to unlawful detention and racial discrimination. $400,000 covered reputational damage and emotional distress resulting from the public humiliation of the encounter. $200,000 went toward legal fees and litigation costs. The financial payment closed the lawsuit, but it did not close the questions surrounding the department. City officials announced an internal investigation into the handling of Officer Carter's previous complaints. The review concluded that supervisors had repeatedly dismissed warning signs about his conduct. One investigator summarized the issue during a press briefing. The pattern was visible, the investigator said. It just wasn't addressed. Officer Carter himself faced direct consequences. After the case became public, the department placed him on administrative leave during the investigation and later terminated his employment. A spokesperson explained the decision. The officer's actions during the Starbucks incident violated department standards and eroded public trust. But critics pointed out that the trust had been damaged long before that moment. Community advocates raised the same concern repeatedly during public meetings. "You fired him after the lawsuit," one resident said during a city council session. "Why didn't you act after the first complaint, or the second, or the third?" The city council eventually approved a set of policy reforms tied directly to the case. The changes required officers to document the specific basis for detentions involving suspicious person calls and introduced additional training focused on racial profiling and bias. One council member addressed the issue bluntly. When a black man can be handcuffed in a coffee shop without cause, the council member said, "The system is failing." For Marcus Reynolds, the outcome was not about the money. During a final statement after the settlement was announced, he explained what the case represented. "What happened to me happens to people who don't have my job or my credentials every day," he said. He paused before adding the point that had been clear from the beginning. The difference is that this time there was video, there were witnesses, and the city could not pretend it didn't happen. The incident that started with a simple coffee order had forced the city to confront a truth that had been visible inside that Starbucks from the very beginning. A man had been treated like a suspect not because of what he did, but because of who he was. This story is meant to generate awareness. It proves that a single assumption, made in seconds, can expose deep problems in how authority is exercised and who is treated as suspicious in everyday spaces. What happened inside that Starbucks was not complicated. A black man was treated like a suspect while doing nothing more than waiting for coffee, and the consequences forced an entire city to confront what that moment revealed. In 2025, Black Americans were nearly 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans, and 77% of black adults say they are treated less fairly by police than white people. So we have to ask difficult questions. How many similar encounters happen every day without cameras or witnesses? How many people are stopped, searched, or detained simply because someone assumes they don't belong? And how many warning signs inside institutions are ignored until a public scandal forces change? Do you know any organizations that work to protect the rights of black people in America, legal support groups, community safety initiatives, or civil rights coalitions? Share them in the comments. Let's support the people who are working every day to fight discrimination and build safer communities for everyone. What do you think should have happened in this situation? And what reforms are actually necessary to prevent the next one? Leave your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.